everybody ready? Adding the USFG show to your class, or we made a framework scrutiny in the state. You have zero defense of USFG action in the context of your ethics, such as the one AZ way big petition mediate our individual moral law through the system of government sees gradual attempts to improve our relation to the other bits of the state, however, make a true that's impossible, and in fact turn those ethics by the action counselor since it's advocates our own personal responsibility for violence as because of all forms of violence. The alternative dissolve the app except for the USFG embracing the individual ethical stance of 1AC Saul's as their 1AC ethics first. They say permutations solve any links the entirety of the criticism of using the state to pursue our own pursue your personal ethical commitments. Permutation literally does that mean it's still links and permutation separates we are pick out the state, they separate our commitment to act and say this is what the issue because it makes us unpredictable in a movie target where we can't get into anything and several does that to the permutation first trade off this on our capital evidence indicates of placing blame with violence on external institution trades off with your own personal wills violence towards the person hand we all have complaints the impact staff mass structural violence occurring now and creates very conditions before they claim to defend it and ethics is sad. There's one of them says using this plus background to your ethical action makes your app ethically bankrupt the impacts 1AC impact evidence and all anti-conditionality here. First, next flexibility is checking advantage return only with offset bias. They set the government big with the 1AC evidence in infinite prep and last speech to our persuasion outweighs the time benefits of the block and B counter-interpretation that gets one conditional counterclaim and one conditional T can C terms effectually another conditional advocacy worse than the counterclaim because the belief is focus B and D strategic thinking we force the athlete to read their best offense like this as an adult to be the offense no matter what we do and conditionality is not the voter just reject all these conditional advocacies and F education only way to turn shapes for a new counterclaim T so they've been fake stagnating and G all arguments conditional no team no team goes for everything. Also I think it's kind of funny they're gonna complain about one counterclaim one criticism whenever they're out probably isn't topical all you should look at it in the context of actually looking at the debate, not just in general if they were just reading something like IFR after or anything like that. Next, they say they focus on the ontological references prerequisite for any kind of environmental justice, but they don't actually focus on the ontological references. All this is about my answers. And on the overview, also they say you have to increase research and not increase solidarity. But the thing is that they're just doing exactly what the state did in the beginning whenever they created these land leases. They're saying the USFG is going to have to take them away. If anything, the counterclaim is going to be net better, and probably also there's no reason at all why the alternative could be a net benefit counterclaim, which I'll get to now. First. They read they see the CP is bad. I'm going to interpret that as a regular counterclaim is bad, but it's not a consolidated counterclaim is precise and it just uses advocacy as a foundation for the discussion. This is the most rewarding, predictable discussion requires as states pointing into process focus is good for policy making, guarantee support, hard and much discussion of cloud governance, high level abstraction or philosophy details are important agencies and authorities to use alternative means to dispute resolution with respect to self and regulation vehicles. Among the interests would be significantly affected by the role of negotiated rulemaking represents and the interests will be significantly affected by the role of negotiated consensus private parties agree to support the proposal and through process implementation focus are uniquely key to energy policy. Nolan and Lovely's benefits of energy but struggle to influence gap results in opposition caused by applicants regulations on the substance rather than the process. Resulting opposition is much product how it with proposed parents of mitigation with the procedure of mitigation such as regnet can be used to bridge this by collaborative approach to speed the centerpiece of any governmental policy and or they can say no and delay arguments. 5 legislative support for regnet guarantees strong literature base advocate and 98 there's substantial literature and negotiated rulemaking that reader might begin with negotiated rulemaking act theory and practice negotiated rulemaking and excellent just publish a share regulatory negotiation a very useful dialogue and regulatory negotiation as a form of system participation may be found and for your next they say from both debate over the plan occurring at the same time as regnex render the regnex useless and send a message to participants that they don't matter and can't do both. Regnex are an alternative to a notice and commitment perm undercuts the potential of regnex perm and to regulatory negotiation alternative notice and common participation regnex which is better results. Regnex gives parties involved as well as interest group a chance to directly participate in formatting rules difference between notice and common we're rolling and acting agencies rules and then announce them to other parties have the chance to influence the decision making process. Parties including agencies such as the EPA are more satisfied right, and any deviation from strictly regulated approach means parties lose interest in negotiations. Fell Martin and 92 the ACTA laws, the ACTA laws ahead and need to determine the arbitration proceeding or vacate arbitration award before it becomes final expectation of summary power will be exercised. Otherwise, parties will quickly lose faith in arbitration involving the government, and the firm will decide this process by which doomed legislative goals specifically applies to, or actually skip that part. They say perm to the counterclaim but the perm is illegitimate, separate certainty, and immediacy. One resolves firm decision, New Oxford American Dictionary, 5 firm decisions to do or not do something, and 2 should guarantees an action that occurs immediately. No, this 5 should is the principles word shall and denotes obligation, and 3 7 that makes happen target, and 4 increases mandate HEFC, and 4 the draft defines compliance objective as to increase compliance examples demonstrate the increased use relation to consideration taken into account the exercise functional obligation to be considered to be ever increasing, and also kind of doesn't actually it will result in something different. Yeah, we are actually the only ones that actually go to the indigenous people and find out what they want instead of just the state going on, and say, hey, I'm pretty sure you don't want these land leases. They don't give you any specific example of where one indigenous person has said, we don't want to have to go through these barriers for these land leases, and we want these people to come in and build energy on our land and things like that. We're the only ones that actually go to them and talk to them about what they want. If anything, they're just perpetuating the oppression that they are criticizing. Also, the courts must avoid clogging and unimportant litigation to focus on immigration. ICE and 11 DHS insurance, immigration, foreign resources are focused on the removal of those who constitute our highest priorities. DHS is to ensure these priorities now when immigration reform, rather shouldn't DOJ will enter agency work group that will identify high priority removal cases that should be hold on, that is the wrong card. Okay, anyway, also they say terrorism is because war zones, that is our Herman Evans is pretty good. In fact, whenever we don't have effective U.S. Immigration enforcement, if anything, that's going to increase any kind of terrorism act. Also, I think the fact that 9/11 happened probably discounts as well. If anything, politics would be a net benefit to it. Go to the case. All their arguments with utilitarians doesn't really matter. They say that they apply to if anything check. There's no reason to reject our impacts, I guess. Also, crossed by our multiplier lifestyle value is going to be inherent debt that we're going to avoid that. Look to the politics scenario. Also, they don't answer our shawl or our shell card. It's better to have our extinction will outweigh any kind of the values. Also, policy has to look at and the policy making framework has to look at consequentialism first. If anything, this is actually Also, our church go to the language K, I guess first. Okay, I quadruple dog dare them to go for this language K here. This is a complete joke. There's no reason at all why just because one of our cards say Native Americans that has nothing to do, or we perpetuate this violence that they say, especially whenever they type it in their own plan text and then give a long explanation, cross-examination of why they had to do that because some people don't know and things like that. If anything, it proves why that language is used within our evidence. We'll take time just a second. Yeah. Yeah. That's fine. Alright, we have something ready for us now. Okay, I'm ready for it.
Okay, so could you explain how the leasing process works?
The leasing process?
Yeah.
From what I understand of what you all have told us, if they want to lease out their land, they have to go through all these hoops.
Yeah, if the plan just gets rid of these hoops, Like, they don't have to talk to the Secretary of Interior, and just allows indigenous people to determine whether or not they lease their land. Why do we need to have negotiations to determine, like, anything?
Right. We'll say that the negotiations are a good thing because then we're able to find out what actually the indigenous
But
people
like,
want, right?
wouldn't the indigenous people choose not to lease their land if they don't want to after we remove the external hoops? Like, why are we making them lease land?
We're not making them.
Why are we making them lease land?
Okay, our argument is that whenever you remove these restrictions, you're basically becoming the state again. First off, it complements our displacement.
I'm talking about the regulatory
As well as
negotiations
regulatory
argument here.
negotiations. You are not, or you all have not presented any way of how you actually deal with what the indigenous people are wanting. Like,
Why?
clearly,
I don't
there's
understand
a
why
reason
negotiations are needed if indigenous peoples can choose whether or not to lease their land after we remove the restrictions.
Okay, negotiations are needed to work with other companies that they may want to.
So we need to
serve in.
incorporate the perspectives of companies on whether or not indigenous people should be allowed to lease their land to companies.
Okay, it has to do with the companies, it has to do with indigenous people.
Okay, then how do you solve for
USFG.
self-determination if you're incorporating perspectives like other companies and the state
Right, it's a
into whether or not
roundtable
indigenous people can?
discussion, right, which, I mean, I think
But
you all
like,
should
indigenous
probably
people
say is a
own the
good
land,
thing.
why can't they lease it?
Do I?
Why can't indigenous people just choose whether or not to lease the land themselves?
Regulatory negotiations will look at it for the best interest of everybody, will be.
But
our answer.
isn't it in the best interest of indigenous peoples to choose whether or not to lease their land?
I mean, I guess we'll
Okay,
find out
the
when
terror
regulatory
requirement for
negotiation happens,
The
if that's what they
environmental
want.
review regulations,
And if anything,
that's fine.
all
Why
of
are
our, like,
environmental-
arguments of why
or the
the
leasing,
solar
that's
wind
fine.
is
For
bad,
the leasing
and they don't do
restrictions,
that.
there are environmental review regulations and that allow public input into whether or not the environmental reviews are acceptable or not. Doesn't this show that we solve for the critique better because we are stopping people from being able to determine whether or not indigenous people can build solar developments?
There is no way at all that you would ever be able to solve the displacement case better. One, because you're still using the USFG.
Why does the
All we
government
do is do your act.
Why does
but
the
without
government
using the
require
USFG.
environmental review provisions from indigenous peoples?
Do what?
Why does the government require indigenous or review provisions from indigenous
I mean,
peoples?
I don't know, nor do I know why that matters. but-
Don't you think it might be because people want a clean environment that aren't indigenous peoples and they might want to protect the interests of those external people?
Okay, the whole point of the criticism and whatever you're going to start ranting about or whatever, the criticism will do whatever you're going to say
Isn't the
about
criticism talking about how we have individual responsibility?
it. Right.
If the government acts
You
on our
make it
behalf,
though
if
to where the
that's-
state is doing another
if the government
action
acts
of
on our
just
behalf
oppressing the
and we
indigenous
advocate
people
that the
to do
government should stop doing something on our behalf, aren't we taking individual responsibility
No,
and saying
because
we should act?
it's still, the USFG has to do this. It's not like that that us, just normal people, not the USFG, can do anything.
Okay, do that. We'll do some.
Yeah, I can just get it to you.
Okay, we're good.
Alright. One second. I did.
I'm just stating.
You need a flash drive.
No, I'm just stating it. You want me to put it on that one?
Sure.
Will you send it to the Dropbox as well,
Yeah.
please?
I have a flash drive.
Here you go. Is it under Obama? Yes. It's gonna be the counter plan, real quick, and then, just elections. Can I see your computer? Yeah. Everyone good? Politics and then count from the politics? It's just the counter plan and then election. Okay. tonight, and I accept the support of the local council to stop agencies, but agencies really enjoy these benefits and certainly ignore and silence try to place the public, but building a mutual cooperative relationship with citizens and agency plans and programs will be well known and more likely accepted. There will be less community polarization and more information and feedback about the agency and public, and as a result, more policies that are just not passive execs but actively supported by the public. Going on to elections. Okay. First off, disavowing solve the case back to the extinction level effects of time relations within the Shell and 2008 card specifically talks about extinction outweighs all effects at the level because of the level to which the extinction ruins the world. It goes outside the any of everything before and it says it outweighs all of the values specifically probable because even if the smallest bit infinity means it's still infinity. And Tucker Palmer 12 cards specifically says that Romney is going to squeeze China. He's going to label him in January. We have months tackling instead of years. Magnitude will outweigh because of the higher control and annihilation. And I promise you the card that says that he did it on Thursday. Here it is. Romney will label him Sharma in October 6th. And Romney has been attacked in China, but the cheating must definitely be brought to a second. President Obama hasn't done it and won't do it, but I will. Then going on alignment. First off, they say that they're already giving loan guarantees, but our medical evidence says that people are tired of this now, meaning that the acronym will trigger it because people don't want anything else to do with wind and solar. Because what happened with Cylinder and Veritas, where the United States federal government decided to invest in these companies, and they ultimately brought down profits by 90%, and ultimately Cylinder failed to a point where we aren't going to be able to get back any of the money which we gave them. Then they say that security is bad. The only way to solve security is during a 99. Problem with the European position that might be usually used in policy inflation. Telling people the tendency to about the underlying problem is negating the series and probably war because the increases. Then they say that Romney, this is not true. First time it's in the bone evidence specifically talks about how fundraising is going to tip the scale to Obama because he has more money, so his voice can be heard more. Funds are key to the election in a sense that, like, without the money to have your voice heard throughout the air, you're not going to be able to get your voice out there. So that means that if Obama is going to spend more money and fundraise more money, that means that he's going to be able to be heard. Then, speculative approval and disingenuous, they're going to vote Obama, Holder, and 11. Not sure people who march for the Uptown Trial and Sunday reported everything from the coal to building to the military actions and sharing two things in common: President Obama and the science and a lot of science. Most protectors in the Conservation Daily were either steadfast supporters of the third party suggestion from Obama, but planning to vote for him anyway. This means that they only have an argument that says that Romney's going to win because of the economy, but overall, their disenchantment with Obama's going to overweigh any of Romney's ability to win. And Obama will win Bloomberg in 8:15. Romney laments that Brian's emergency Obama campaign focused away from the job that shifting to the entitlements and chief Obama strategist David Axelrod argues that Romney's choice of Brian is another example of Romney undermining his long-term prospects in order to maintain short-term viability as he done in the primaries against Perry and Santorum and beating Perry. He hurt himself in immigration legislation, doesn't beat himself, he hurt himself with women. Go on to the link state. I'm going to spend substantial time here because their arguments aren't enough to answer this. Extend the Michael's evidence, which I had up earlier. This card is really specific about how people do not want any more wind and solar. They don't want the government involved with wind and solar because they perceive wind and solar as being a waste. They don't want anything to do with it. Make them read you a card that specifically answers that. Their card about it isn't enough because it doesn't specifically talk about how the public views it. And it doesn't take into account the Cylinder and Veritas arguments. And overall, Obama's solar push is now popular as constitutional fund in 12 failure of Obama's green energy revolution publicized around the bankruptcy of Cylinder to predict a big Obama number when his number would fail public investment in nothing but a way to shuffle the green into political influencing producers. And Republicans in the plan as an Obama furthering the green energy. That means the plan destroys Obama's election strategy of the Twiler in 718. Amrex received more than $20 million for shutting 40 months after the latest casualties of Obama administration clean energy centers, which have become a major target of the Republicans. The news comes at an opportune moment for Republicans, and the wind energy is on top of Sherry and 12. The industry tries to argue that achieving fruitful public production like laborers and members all never support because they believe the government should not be waivers losers. These cards coupled with the cards that we read on case about how it's not able to suffer any electricity demands are the reason why you're going to prefer our link arguments over there because there's absolutely no reason why they don't link to the plan considering it was wind and solar production. On top of that, people hate this because of the economy, and on top of that, they hate it because it's not even going to be able to do anything for the electricity demand in the end. Then they say that this heat argument, that's not true. Heat happened in 2005. That's what their card is talking. That's what their card concedes. That has nothing to do with Obama. That's what their tag says. And then they say that they've already called them out. But there's a difference between calling them out as cheaters and us thinking about doing a tariff because we haven't imposed a tariff and we're just considering imposing the tariff and calling them a cheater is what trades off with other cooperation. That's what Lardy intent specifically talks about how if we label China that just our talk to nuclear weapons, specifically toward the willingness of China to talk about North Koreans and come into nuclear talks with me. We're not going to be able to have nuclear talks about sanctions on Korea and North Korea. That means we're going to see extinction level impacts happening much sooner. And hard end trade policy, also Trump's foreign policy issues, one of the U.S. and China has issues, cut it there. It's not intrinsic because the affirmative, like, there is no reason why, like, there's a difference between the U.S. passing.
Elections is a good thing.
Elections is a good thing because it allows us to have in-depth topic education because we're actually able to talk about like what's happening in Congress and how their plan is able to affect what's currently happening. That increases our ability to be policymakers. If we have the ability to compare policy options and how it's going to affect other policy implications and how that's going to affect the world as a whole, that's important to our education. It's also important to our fairness. This is the key neg argument considering elections are coming up in like 2 months. I would understand if it was multiplied. Then extend the U.S.-Russia relations public station our place says that they need to cooperate on terrorism, crime, and proliferation.
Jump start.